So now our last conversation is with Dr. Justin Newland. I caught up with Justin earlier in the week to talk about his recent novel, The Old Dragon's Head, which is a tale of 15th century Chinese murder, treason, supernatural. And it's set in the Ming Dynasty. And we spoke about the book, the background to the book, and what to expect when he comes here and talks to us about another of his books this coming autumn. So over to our previous conversation. Well, I'm delighted to welcome Justin Newland to the studio today to talk about The Old Dragon's Head, his latest novel. Good morning, Justin.
Yeah, good morning, Pauline. Pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's a joy to welcome you because you have just published The Old Dragon's Head, a tale of 15th century murder, treason, superstition, tradition. And I have just read the book, which you kindly sent me, set in brutal times in the Ming Dynasty. You've written other work in the classical tradition as well, but what drew you to this period to write, this ancient Chinese period?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose one of the main things that I was looking for a historical period in which to set the story. And I'd done some research on China before I came to do this, and I was looking for a society which had tried to order itself according to what it saw as the laws of the divine laws, if you like, God's laws. Hence, we'll probably go into this in due course, but I've conceived a talk which I'm giving in various libraries around Somerset over this next month or so, which talks about something called the Great Ming Code. Ming is spelled M-I-N-G, which means bright in Chinese.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Bright. Okay. And that dynasty lasted how long?
That lasted until 1644. Started in 1368.
So a good long time. Long time. And I mean, let's talk about this Great Ming Code, because it's kind of a way of living. It's a code by which people were expected to, or to which they had to adhere and believe.
Yeah, I think, I guess one of the things that interests me about history is that we tend to look at history mostly from the outside. We look at it from the standpoint of a kind of elevated observer. We look back at history now and we say, oh, there shouldn't be a statue to Colston because he was, involved in the slave trade. So we use our sort of high moral stance to look back and make judgments on history. But hindsight
is a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, as they say. But I think, it's different if you're inside that history. And that's what I tried to do, successfully or not. I mean, I think it's almost impossible to do, to picture or take a person or take oneself back to that time, smell the smells they smelled and live the lives they lived, and deal with what we call superstitions, but I don't think they call superstitions at all. It was real.
It was beliefs.
It wasn't belief. It was what was.
Really?
So there's a step on here. For us, it's a belief, but no, it's not. I think it's more than that. It was the fabric of their life.
So in the book, The Old Dragon's Head, we have a scenario where a whole community is living on the edge of the Great Wall, by the sea, struggling in many, many different ways. But towards the end of the book, there are huge battles.
Yeah.
And supernatural, to my simple Western mind, supernatural creatures come towards our Chinese community, and the souls are terrified, and they are seeing these blue creatures as if they are the real enemy. So are you saying that they were, in those people's minds, the real enemy?
Well, that was a fictional.
Oh, right, I believed it.
You believed it, okay. The things I'm talking about is what was enshrined in the Great Ming Code. The Great Ming Code was basically a law book. And I don't know if you know any examples, say, in European tradition, but there's something called in Germany, something called the Sachsenspiegel, which means the Saxon Mirror, and that was a law book in German in 13th, 14th century.
So a very
which
similar
basically
period.
did the same thing.
Yeah.
It said, look, we believe our society needs to be mirrored by the way God ordered the universe. Right.
And so they wrote this
And so
into
they
a
wrote
document.
this, yeah. So
Yes.
if people stepped out of line of that harmony, the reason they were punished was so to mitigate their actions in the light of the gods or the divine beings, so that, you know, harmony could be maintained.
And did this come down to
Between-
the most basic of things, to ways of living?
Yeah.
You know, and how you...
Almost what you ate, you know.
Yeah.
You'd have seen in my book, I got really caught by that period. And at the beginning of each chapter is a little saying, or some sort of
Wise words.
aphorism from Chinese. You know, the wondrous mysteries of magnificent Chinese philosophies. And there's one in there that comes to mind where there's some instructions as to what a man should have in his wallets and his pockets as he goes out. You know, things like something which could light a fire using, you know, a bore of wood. He had to have one of those with him, you know, to go out into the day.
And they were, didn't they?
Well, yeah,
Because
that's how they
later
got
we read
fire.
about how... Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
you know.
Yes.
So there wasn't just instruction on, you know, divine matters and how to conduct oneself in the light of a death of the family, the degree of mourning that went on, but the punishments were ordered according to where you were in society, which is actually the same as in what I mentioned about Sachsenspiegel, the German law book. If you were a king or a prince, then the punishment was different to if you were a pauper or
you weren't
a peasant.
hung, drawn and quartered. You maybe had a very clean, sharp blade on the neck and you were killed instantly or something. I don't know.
Whatever.
I mean, extreme.
You get the idea.
Yes,
Yeah.
I get the idea. So everyone bought into this Great Ming Code. Was it born into people, literally? Did they just grow up with this and it was absolutely innate?
I think that's how I see it. It's just it's so difficult for us to imagine. I mean, a good way that I would describe the difference to you is, in those days, religion was culture. Today, culture is religion. Okay. In those days, say in you know, if you and I met on the street, it would be, by the Lord, Hail Mary, how are you today, Pauline? You know, there would be reference, possibly quite longer than that, to one's gods and one's beliefs.
Yes,
and
yes.
you know, before you even said a word of greeting to anybody.
Yes.
That's how it went. So therefore, the culture was in the religion, or the religion was in the culture.
The only
Today.
It's
We are
just-
religious in our pursuit of culture.
Yes,
That's the point
that's
I'm
very
making. So
true.
that when we look at those days, we sort of shake our heads. So how can they be like that? But if they were looking at us, they'd be shaking our heads, saying, how can
Why
we
are they
be
speaking
like that?
like that?
Why are we like
They'll
that?
be condemned by the gods.
Well, yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes. The only thing I can think in modern civilizations, use the word loosely, where that might apply is in Austria still you greet people by saying Grüß Gott.
Okay.
And
So there's still remnants.
so there's a
of it.
link
There's bound to be
there
remnants, yeah.
to 500 years before,
Yeah.
to maybe that Saxon code. But here we're in China. And what you were telling me, and I didn't quite realise too, is that you've deliberately built your talks in Somerset around now because it is the Chinese New Year.
Which began yesterday.
Yes, began, on the 5th, and so runs for 15 days
That's right.
until the moon is full.
That's right.
So it's a perfect time to talk about and think about Chinese matters and so on. Let's talk about the book. So you began to research because you wanted to look into another ancient civilization. You'd already looked into Egypt. How did you plump for this idea of this layer of people living on the end of the Great Wall and struggling, men and women and children?
That was quite easy because the title of the book is The Old Dragon's Head, which I discovered in just to cut a long story short, I actually wrote a short story about a wall nearer to home, about Hadrian's Wall. And I began to think there are so many walls in the world. It's unbelievable. Why have we built so many walls? Yeah, new ones to come. Yeah, that's right.
Horrors.
So the old Dragon's Head is the Chinese believed that the Great Wall was occupied by a sort of numinous, mystical, invisible dragon, which arose up in times of trouble, a bit like sort of King Arthur in Britain, and fought back the foe, which at the time was the Mongols. The Old Dragon's Head is a real place. It's at the eastern end, the far eastern end of the Great Wall, at a place called Shanghai One. And it's where the wall actually meets the sea, the only place it meets the sea. And so the idea was that you'll read that don't disturb the dragon because it's having a drink. So the head of the dragon is in the sea.
In the sea. And a number of our characters...
There's got to be a story.
Yes.
There's got to be a story.
Certainly. But with some of our characters, their task day in, day out is to take care of the wall, isn't it? Mend it, repair it, polish it, clean it. They have to look after the wall, otherwise presumably the dragon will be really unhappy. That's what I took to be their work on the wall.
Well, yeah, that's right. That's what they're doing. But I also I didn't want to have made, because you're talking about one of the characters, probably the main character of the story, a fellow named Bolin, spelled Bolin. But I didn't want to have a character who was like a prince or a duke or a captain. I wanted a kind of sort of what life was like for the peasants, really.
Yeah.
So I tried to invent, because people weren't allowed to go on the wall. It was like a sacred place. So there had to be a reason of him to go there. So he was like part of the maintenance team, if you like. Yeah.
The maintenance team.
Yeah.
And then there was the woman who intrigued me, who took care of ancestors' documents and histories and so on, and she was and she had a son too. That was a lovely story throughout the middle of the book too.
Really, yeah. The struggle for authors writing about medieval times is to introduce female characters who are more than just compliant.
Yes.
But I think that was, as far as I know, would have been fairly accurately drawn. Because, like most cultures, Chinese believe, that some women, some people had extra powers, supernatural powers, clairvoyant powers. And so, she fitted into that category. And I wanted to introduce a female character as a prominent character in the book.
And she had the yin-yang eyes.
She did, and so did he. Yes,
so did
that's
he.
Right.
Tell us what yin and yang mean to our Western minds.
They're basically a kind of a law of two things. Yin means the soft, the yielding, the dark, and often means female. Yang means the bright, the light, the firm, and often associated with the sun and with masculinity or male. And
the theory is we have some of each in all of us.
That's right. Well, we do.
Yeah. And the ability to see with yin yang eyes is to see beyond what's presented to you, but see into their souls.
Yeah, to see into what's hidden, into the sort of hidden realms of things. I mean, just as an example, I mean, you wonder what it is that alcoholics see when they have delirium tremens. I mean, they supposedly see demons and so they hallucinate. So they're seeing something. So I suppose if there's some sort of world out there that can be seen, a world of spirits.
The brain is seeing it. Yes.
Maybe that's what they're seeing. So,
have you been to China?
No.
And so that's interesting. Obviously studied in depth to get the background for this book. Would you like to go to China?
Of course.
Would you like to see that place?
Yeah.
It still exists, obviously.
Yeah, you can go there as a tourist. In fact, I contacted somebody trying to get involved in a book festival. They said, my son's just been there for a rave.
Oh, no.
So I thought, okay.
Oh, my goodness.
Good for him.
Well, that's one way of seeing China.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my goodness. Well, so that's fascinating because it does give the impression that you are immersed in Chinese law. How long did you research before you began to write?
Probably about 6 months. Yeah. But as I said, I'd done some research before. But the way I like to do research is to go to the source material. And so I read some novels which had been written at the time by Chinese authors.
And so are there many of those still
No.
able? I was going to say, I would be
3.
surprised. I mean, what have we got? We've got Beowulf, we've got the Decameron, we've
There aren't
got
that many.
Chaucer. So we haven't got that many to choose from, have we?
One or two of them were actually quite racy. I couldn't believe it.
Oh, really?
Probably not for your community show. But I hadn't intended to, it's only parts of it. But yeah,
Yes.
it gave an insight into the times, the period, what their concerns was, how they thought. Because that's the key thing, I think, is how a person thinks. And that's, I suppose that's what they use on, profiling for criminals. If you want to understand something, then you have to think like them.
Yes.
So you use the same principle to understand a culture or a society or the people in it. It's difficult.
But you've got to unconnect
enjoyable.
or disconnect one's Western brain totally to try and get here. I was reading an article about Japanese gardens, and to try and understand what they mean is really, really difficult.
Okay.
It's hard for us
Yes.
Westerners, I think, to actually get under the skin of such cultures because we just haven't got that cultural experience.
Yeah, that mindset.
That mindset.
Yeah, right.
we're not there, are we?
No.
It's fascinating. So, tell us about how you're going about marketing the book, Justin, because you're this week speaking at Minehead Library. You were saying you're in Exeter this week as well?
Tomorrow. This is being recorded on the Wednesday, so you're going out on Friday, so it would have been yesterday.
Yes.
Tomorrow I'm in Exeter. On Saturday, I'm in Frome Library at 11 a.m. And then, I've got some others at Dorchester Library on Saturday week.
That is really good because the bookings that you've got in these libraries are obviously through the county council library service.
Yes, it's fantastic to try and help support a rather flagging library system at the moment.
Exactly so, and that's very current for us here in Wivelscombe because we are just going through the final, hopefully, paperwork in half taking on the running of our own library here in Wivy, which was threatened with closure in November. And although it is one of the smallest libraries you could imagine, it has a very much higher readership and success rate than its square footage tells you, because we serve a very big rural hinterland, and so we are per square foot much more successful than, say, Wellington, which is a very big, spacious place. So it was a shame that we were threatened with closure, but the community's come up trumps and is saving it. But having events like this is great to draw people into libraries and give them different views and different ideas.
Yeah, it is. I mean, one of the ways I was putting something on Facebook the other day. I said, come and find out about something you don't know about already. Because I mean, you watch TV and so on, and read the news, and they just tell you stuff you know about already. I wish they'd tell us something new. And I kind of think as well that it's really important to try to get a context for events.
You mean to learn from history?
But for sure, yeah.
Do you think, I'm a bit sort of jaundiced in this aspect, but I think that the teaching of history and the interest in history these days is so thin. People don't consider history as a subject to study at university particularly. It's not popular. Geography and history are falling, the sciences and what have you. And I think people have so little idea about where we're coming from, and I think it's really terribly sad. I read in the paper the other day some woman, I think in Bristol, who had no idea in the house she bought what the great sort of ugly concrete thing in her backyard was. She had no idea it was an air raid shelter. Because she had no idea about the war and no idea... all of that, you know.
Yeah.
And I think, if you don't know where... it's a corny phrase, but if you don't know where you come from, you know, and all that...
You don't know where you're going.
So history is totally relevant. It's not just old dry stuff, is it?
No, it's not.
I mean, you would agree because you're writing about it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether Egyptian or Chinese.
Yeah, and the current novel I'm working on is set in Prussia, in Germany, which is why I mentioned Sachsenspiegel and the German law book earlier.
And that is on 15th century Prussia also?
No, that's 18th century.
18th century.
So it's Frederick the Great and the Enlightenment.
That's an interesting period.
Very interesting period.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's one to look forward to, I know, because having read The Old Dragon's Head and knowing what depth of research you've gone into, and it taught me things I had no idea about, this will do the same. As the Egypt book, I've yet to read the Egypt book.
You've yet to read it, it's true.
But Justin, have a good talk in Minehead Library. It's been great talking to you today on 10 Radio. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And every success with the book and future books.
Thank you so much, Pauline. Pleasure to be here and to talk to you.
And we hope, don't we, to book you for a talk here later in the year.
Yeah, we just got to arrange a date.
We're arranging a date for you to come and talk to the Civic and Historic Society. So that will be lovely. But until then, thank you, Justin.
Excellent. Thank you, Pauline.